The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Robert Abela, Prime Minister of the Republic of Malta. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Secretary General, President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and dear friends. When we gathered this time last year, little could we have predicted that just a couple of weeks later, our world would be plunged into even greater turmoil by the despicable attacks of October the 7th. And the 12 months since, we have seen continued loss of life and a humanitarian emergency on such a scale that it is all too easy to give up hope, all too easy to believe that nothing can be done, all too easy to turn the other cheek. We cannot escape from the stark reality that our world faces the gravest of challenges, and the populations of far too many of these United Nations face the greatest perils. The gravity of these threats is such that we, as leaders from across the globe, are confronted with a choice of two paths. We can choose the path of despair, dejectedly deciding that it is impossible to make a difference, or we can choose the path of persistence, determined that no matter how rough the waters, we can and we must redouble our efforts to meet those challenges and mitigate those perils. I emphatically believe that we have a moral responsibility to take the path of persistence. I will never apologize for reaffirming the simple belief that motivated me to come into public life, that tomorrow can be better than today. And no matter what the headwinds, it is a belief that still motivates all I do. I refuse to believe that we should just give up. I refuse to listen to those siren whispers that the worst is inevitable and it is not worth working for better outcomes. I refuse to give in to the notion that we can defer difficult decisions or that small countries have to passively accept the actions of the larger players. To acquiesce to that negativity would be to accept that this General Assembly, that this United Nations is nothing more than a council of despair. To that, I say a resounding no. This United Nations can and must be a council of hope. Nobody is going to pretend that we can wave any sort of magic wand or deliver instant solutions. But we have a duty to keep hope alive, to keep trying, to keep working, to keep battling for the values that were the very foundation of the idea of a United Nations. 8 decades ago, from the rubble of the first truly global conflict, our forerunners had the courage and the foresight to see that the world had to have a forum where the voice of every nation could be heard. And as colonialism rightly crumbled, there were a lot of newly independent nations to add their signatures to the Charter. Malta is one such nation. As we gained our independence from the United Kingdom, we took our place in the world. This year marks the 60th anniversary of Malta's accession to the United Nations. Over those 6 decades, my country has developed beyond the wildest dreams of the pioneers who saw us to statehood. So, as we mark 60 years of Malta as a proud member of the United Nations, and as the United Nations itself gets ready to mark its 80th anniversary, my message is clear. The world needs the United Nations now more than ever. Malta values the United Nations now more than ever. And make no mistake, Malta may be a small country, but we will always be a loud voice against deferring difficult decisions and avoiding difficult conversations. We will never resign ourselves to a future devoid of peace. We will never abandon our commitment to supporting peace processes, no matter how tough those processes may be. We will remain steadfast in our support for steps to build and maintain peace in every region of conflict. We will remain as committed to and confident in this United Nations as that day in December of 60 years ago when the ink dried on Malta's signature. Malta has a unique political and geographical position at the heart of the Mediterranean, a bridge between Europe and North Africa, and the crossroads of Europe and the Middle East. A full member of the European Union, but with neutrality enshrined in our Constitution. We are acutely aware of the responsibility that this position brings. Two words sum up the role that I believe Malta can and does play: honest broker. From hosting peace talks to brokering difficult dialogues, we aim to harness our unique position to bring those in conflict together, to at least try and find a way forward. This is exactly the approach that Malta has brought to our membership of the Security Council over the past 2 years. And that is exactly the approach we have brought to the chair of the OSCE, which we assumed last January. Malta was happy to step up and take the chair as an honest broker, allowing all members to endorse our leadership and ensuring the work of this vital body can continue. Like Malta, the OSCE is a bridge between neighbors across continents. Europe can only be secure and at peace if its neighbors are secure and at peace, which is why both in the Security Council and the OSCE, our guiding watchwords are always promoting sustainability, peace, and security. This approach sits well alongside the OSCE's comprehensive conception of security as not just about ending military conflict, but also addressing the social and economic tensions that create and exacerbate international tensions. To that end, we will continue to press for all nations to comply with the Arms Trade Treaty. The failure of too many countries to comply with international rules poses too great a threat to too many innocent citizens. President, as I've reflected on my country's 6 decades of membership of this United Nations, I've looked back at the wisdom of some of those who have held the office of Secretary General. Sadly, those words of Ban Ki-moon remain as true and urgent today as ever. The world is overarmed and peace is underfunded. The peace and humanitarian budgets, which are at the heart of the UN's mission, remain unfortunately severely underfunded, harshly impacting too many of the world's most vulnerable people, which is why Malta urges all member states to play their part by remitting the resources to ensure the hard-working, hard-pressed frontline UN staff can play their part in bringing relief and hope where it is so desperately needed. As Malta concludes its current term on the Security Council, I am proud of what we have been able to help achieve. Amidst the tragedy of the events in Israel and Gaza, we have worked with others to prioritize the relief of humanitarian suffering. We used our seat on the Security Council to work for Resolution 2712, which demanded urgent and extended humanitarian pauses and the provision of corridors through Gaza to supply critical supplies needed by so many innocent civilians, not the least children. The resolution also called for the release of hostages held captive by Hamas and other militant groups in Gaza. We are proud that this led to the release of 105 hostages during the negotiated 7-day pause. Similarly, I am pleased Malta played a key role in the Security Council adopting Resolution 2728, which demanded an immediate ceasefire in Gaza for the month of Ramadan, alongside the immediate release of all hostages. This was the first joint motion from the non-permanent members on a geographic situation in the Security Council's history. Understandably, much of the world's attention has been on Israel and Gaza since October the 7th, which has now expanded to a dangerous and deeply worrying escalation in Lebanon. We stand firm in our belief that we must all strive to ensure that the flames of this conflict do not engulf the whole region, and that we all take decisive steps to resolve this conflict before it is too late. Furthermore, it is imperative that we, as a global community, do not lose focus on those other parts of the world where war and the killing of civilians is also all too present and all too tragic a daily reality. Sudan, Yemen, Syria, and, of course, Ukraine. So, let me now turn to another country in conflict, Malta's southern neighbor, Libya. Helping the Libyan people achieve a genuine and lasting resolution to the institutional crisis for which they have paid too high a price for too long is a key priority for Malta. For such a resolution would not only benefit the Libyan people, it would also benefit all Libya's neighbors and also the wider region. Only with a single functioning government supported by citizens across the whole country can Libya play its full part in addressing the migrant crisis, which puts so many lives at risk. Which is why Malta welcomes the initiatives taken by UNSMIL in bringing the parties together to sign an agreement that will hopefully end a crisis at the central bank of Libya, and also to kickstart this stalled wider political process. Malta will continue to stand ready to do anything it can to aid that process. And we will be unstinting in advocating for proactive engagement by the international community to support and enhance those UN-led efforts. Together, we have a duty to aid the mediation needed to create a pathway towards national, parliamentary, and presidential elections in Libya. As friends and neighbors of Libya, we can and must help. But for the process to truly succeed, it must be fully Libyan-led and Libyan-owned, to which end we unequivocally call for the immediate withdrawal of all foreign forces, fighters, and mercenaries from Libya. And Malta re-emphasizes the need for a full completion of the Libyan arms embargo in line with all the relevant Security Council resolutions. Equality is a key value for my government and my country, just as the situation in Libya will only be resolved by all the people of the country knowing that they have an equal voice, so are so many of the conflicts, disputes, and tensions around the world fueled by inequality. Equality isn't some sort of added extra, nice to have, but not vital to tackling the world's problems. That view couldn't be more misguided. Equality across gender, age, race, religion, disability, sexuality is not just imperative for its own sake. Equality is also imperative in finding lasting solutions to so many of the challenges that face us all. So, I am honored Malta stands at the forefront of promoting civil liberties globally. We are one of the few countries that has already implemented an anti-racism strategy, and we are now in the process of drafting a second renewed anti-racism strategy. We will never take equality for granted at home, and we will always advocate and support greater equality internationally. All too often, it is women and girls who bear the brunt of conflict, and all too infrequently are the voices of women and girls heard when it comes to solving those conflicts. Without women, there can be no peace. As the world redoubles its efforts to bring peace, so must we all redouble our efforts to ensure the voice of women and girls is heard at the top tables as well as on the ground. During our term on the Security Council, Malta has worked hard to do just that. Malta has chaired the Security Council Working Group on Children and Armed Conflict. In the last 18 months, the working group has issued conclusions on the role of children in the conflicts in South Sudan, Nigeria, Mali, Afghanistan, CAR, Colombia, Iraq, and Somalia. That long list is a sad testament to the magnitude and gravity of the repeated violations against children in crisis zones. We must never let up in our outrage and actions at these persistent and flagrant abuses of the rights of the child as enshrined by this United Nations. President, we have a saying in Maltese, Il-Bahar Senior, the sea is wealthy. And indeed it is. As an island nation for Malta, the wealth of the sea equates to the wealth of our people. The health of the sea equates to the health of our people. So we need no reminder just how essential it is to protect the wealth, health, and the biodiversity of our seas and oceans. And we know just how much small island nations like ours will be impacted as climate change warms oceans and raises sea levels. We, small island nations, are amongst the lower emitters of greenhouse gases. But we are literally the front line of the climate emergency. The impact of climate change will be felt by all our citizens. It is our duty to them to do all we can to minimize that change and maximize our resilience to the changes which are already being felt. Delay and prevarication simply aren't options. Climate change must remain at the top of the global agenda. Solidarity, standing shoulder to shoulder with our fellow small island nations, is a key value for Malta. Solidarity means actions, not just words. The Islands for Islands initiative is central to our foreign policy, providing concrete, practical assistance to small island developing states, sharing best practice and building capacity. That's why Malta has jointly taken the lead in developing the Climate Vulnerability and Resilience Index, a practical resource to help small islands identify and prepare better for the effects of the changing climate. As sea levels become an even greater concern, so does the health of our seas and oceans become ever greater a priority. Malta remains and will always remain at the forefront of efforts to protect our oceans. In the very first years of our UN membership, we were one of the foremost proponents of the principle of the common heritage of mankind. Thank you, Arvid Pardo. And it remains our lodestar. We have consistently spoken up in the Security Council about the existential threat from rising sea levels, and Malta will always remain unwavering in our support for the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Malta welcomes the first ratifications of the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, which will provide much needed, much greater protection for the 2/3 of global oceans that lie beyond national jurisdictions. The treaty will only come into force when 60 nations have ratified it. Our oceans need it. Our people deserve it. So I say to my fellow leaders, speed up and sign. To preserve healthy maritime environments, we all need to take practical, innovative solutions and steps. That's why I am delighted at the success Malta's new shore-to-ship initiative is having. The stunning Grand Harbour in the capital city of Malta, which is Valletta, is a magnet for cruise ships. But while docked in berth, they can produce serious amounts of pollutions if relying on their engines in the confined space. So shore-to-ship is installing onshore power supply alongside the quays, which are used by cruise ships, meaning that they can switch off their engines and help reduce pollution in this most special of places by around 90%. In Malta, we know that while the sea can yield great gifts, it can also be the host for illicit activity and the breaking of international laws. The high seas must never become the Wild West. The rule of law and the will of the international community must always hold on sea as on land, which is why Malta championed the creation of a unified database of all vessels which are involved in illicit activity, shareable and usable by all participating states. Shipping is central to international trade, so ensuring they are fully applied at sea is central to any successful sanctions regime. And that can only happen if ship owners know that trying to break sanctions brings consequences. But it is essential for reasons of natural justice and to ensure buy-in from member states that the listing of those breaking sanctions is both fair and transparent. So Malta was proud to jointly hold the pen alongside the United States for Resolution 2744 that overhauls the delisting process for the first time in almost 2 decades. By creating a better system for delisting where warranted, we can ward against premature lifting of sanctions which is not warranted. President, we have witnessed how effective global health policies can unite nations, especially when addressing crises that transcend borders and that affect us all. Just yesterday, United Nations member states adopted the political declaration on antimicrobial resistance, which has been diligently facilitated by Malta and the Barbados over so many months. AMR presents a collective threat and demands our urgent attention. We know what must be done to prevent the loss of millions of lives and avert trillions of dollars in additional healthcare costs. This declaration should serve as a strategic roadmap for policymakers, guiding their efforts to tackle AMR in the years ahead. President, when we reconvene in a year's time, we will be marking the 80th birthday of our United Nations. But we mustn't ever be just marking time. We need to always be marking progress. As Dag Hammarskjöld said, the pursuit of peace and progress cannot end in a few years in either victory or defeat. The pursuit of peace and progress with its trials and its errors, its successes and its setbacks can never be relaxed and never abandoned. In Europe, the average life expectancy is just over 80 years. United Nations will only have life expectancy longer than that if we all recommit to its future. As the saying goes, I want reports of its death to be greatly exaggerated. Yes, we can't ignore the fact that the architecture of the world's collective security is under stress like never before. Voices of nationalism dismiss the need to work together. Instigators of conflict believe they can escape the rat and writ of the global community. Both couldn't be more wrong. Acting to end conflict, and relieve suffering is never easy. But that doesn't mean we should stop trying. Reaching consensus across borders and across political differences is never easy. But that doesn't mean we should stop trying. Acknowledging we have all contributed to the state our world is in today and setting aside pride to try and make the world a better place is never easy. But that doesn't mean we should stop trying. Arguably, the temptation to wring hands and see change as too hard to achieve is greatest for small nations like mine. To sit back and sigh that the big boys have made too much of a mess of things. Well, Malta will never sit back. Malta will never wring hands. Malta will never leave it to others. Yes, Malta will always be realistic, but Malta will always remain committed to multilateralism. When the perils are at their greatest, the need to work together is at its greatest. So let us use the next 12 months in the run-up to that 80th anniversary to reassert our collective belief in this United Nations, to redouble our efforts, to resolve conflict, to take the steps the future of the Earth needs, and to deliver the change the people of this planet need and deserve. To raise our game in supporting the Secretary General in delivering the institutional reform the United Nations needs to better fulfill its purpose. In short, and with every fiber of my being, I say to my fellow leaders, now is the time to choose. And we must choose the path of persistence. We must reject the path of despair. Yes, our world faces huge challenges and huge threats. But if we lose belief in the power of collective action, if we lose belief in the ability to work together to make a difference, then we are losing belief in the very idea of a better world. If we fail to persist, we fail to lead. If we fail to persevere, we fail the people who put their faith in us. Failure simply isn't an option. The stakes are too high. The risks are too great. The consequences are too severe. So let us make that choice. Let us today recommit as a United Nations. Let us affirm the path of persistence. And no matter how tough the going, let us enter the 80th year of this United Nations with the simple goal in our head and in our hearts. Let us now, more than ever, never give up believing that tomorrow can and must be better than today. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Republic of Malta.